we're going to ask that you please take a seat here in the auditorium so we can begin our program. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I'm George Robinson, the Director of Supplier Diversity and Inclusion for UPMC, and I'm also the Chairman of SHARE 2022 Pittsburgh. I want to extend a hearty welcome to our event this afternoon. We hope you're enjoying yourselves, and it's nice to finally be back in person with our activities, having had 2 years of virtual sessions and matchmaking as we're turning the curve here on pandemic-related activities. Again, glad to have you in the audience. Today we have the pleasure of gathering and fellowshipping around the communication, the collaboration, and the commerce exchange that only SHARE can extend. And to hear from our special guest and keynote speaker, Dr. Kenneth Harris, the President and CEO of the National Business League. You'll hear more about Dr. Harris in a few moments with his introduction. At this time, I would like to ask if the planning committee members of SHARE Pittsburgh could please stand and be recognized. Planning committee members. If you need anything during the day as a participating vendor or guest in our program, by all means, grab one of the planning committee members that just rose. And please take a moment while you're here this afternoon to introduce yourself to our planning committee members, which represent a host of corporations, government agencies, certifying bodies that are based here in Pittsburgh and in the surrounding communities, if you do not know them already. As the chairperson of SHARE 22 Pittsburgh, the planning committee, it is exciting to see people back in person, and we hope that there is wonderful conversations, not only in this audience and from the comments that you'll hear this afternoon, but of course on the other side of the partition with our matchmaking businesses who are part of this ecosystem that make diverse business commerce exist, grow, and thrive here in Pittsburgh. We're coming together this afternoon to reignite that flame, again, of communication, collaboration, and commerce that only SHARE can do. And with that, it's my distinct pleasure to welcome to the stage our County Executive, Rich Fitzgerald, for remarks. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, George, and thank you also to UPMC and your organization. Really took the lead on this a number of years ago when we were trying to put together a collaborative effort of SHARE and bringing a network of suppliers and purchasers, all together to come to make improvements in where we were and what we've become. And this doesn't happen just by happenstance. It happens with a lot of intentionality of people coming together and working together. I want to welcome and thank Dr. Harris for making the trip to Pittsburgh. I hope you enjoy your trip here. We're not playing your football team this week, so we can be good on all that kind of stuff, although your football team did beat our college team, but that's okay, Michigan. So we'll hold that against you. But no, thank you for coming. And one of the things I think you'll learn about us in Pittsburgh and Western Pennsylvania is a level of collaboration, people coming together. And Lisa Edmonds and her team at the Department of Equity and Inclusion for Allegheny County, they've been working for many years and bringing people together. And we're so excited about the markets and the growth of where Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh region is going, both in some of our traditional organizations and companies and nonprofits like UPMC and Highmark Health, but also some of the new emerging technology, artificial intelligence, robotics that are emerging out of our universities and technologies and the things that are happening. So there is a mix of the traditional and the emerging that are coming together. And I know for suppliers, They just want to do business. They want to do business with anybody, whether it's the new company or the old company, and networking and coming together is the way to do this. And during my 11 years as county executive, I've been glad. I think I've been to every one of these, although, like you said, George, the last couple have been remotely. And while the technology was helpful during the pandemic, it's nothing like getting together and being able to work together, break bread, talk over a cup of coffee, and really make the connections that make business work. So we're really excited about doing this. I know with my partner across the street in City Hall, Mayor Gainey, you're going to hear from him in a little bit on remote. It's an initiative that we want to make sure. We want to make sure that in this community, the opportunities are open to everybody. So we just want people that bring their talents, bring their energy, bring good goods and good supplies and good services to the table to get the best deal we can get for everybody. So I want to thank everybody who's participating. I want to thank the African American Chamber. I know they've been involved. Doris and her team, the Poise Foundation, our philanthropic community really does great things. The Eastern Minority Suppliers, thank you for being part of it as well. Another great organization that partners with us. And really, it doesn't happen without these good partnerships and these good relationships that we want to make sure continue to happen. So thank everybody for coming. Thank everybody for participating. And let's make sure that opportunities for everybody, every supplier, for every organization are open and continue to be. So thank you again. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Although we did have scheduled Mayor Ed Gainey to present us via video, unfortunately he's dealing with some of the issues that we've recently heard in the news in our community right now. And so he does extend his welcome to the audience. And with that, we will have Tracina Cash to introduce our keynote speaker.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tracina Cash, Executive Vice President for the Eastern Minority Supplier Development Council. It is a pleasure to be here today representing our organization, and on behalf of our President and CEO, Brian Oglesby, it's a pleasure to be here. So for introducing Dr. Harris, I want to make sure that I get everything that was shared with us. It's a pleasure to welcome him. He is the 16th National President of the National Business League, the first and largest trade association for Black businesses in the United States. Founded by the iconic and legendary Booker T. Washington on August 23, 1900, 16 years before the United States Chamber of Commerce was founded. The NLB has many regional offices. It's headquartered nationally in Washington, D.C. since 1966, and it has an international office in Cape Town, South Africa. The organization has 120,000 members nationwide, with local chapters in all 50 states, and 125 Fortune 500 corporate partners, and annual revenue of over $20 million. He says that he was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. He earned a full basketball scholarship to the Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia, which is an HBCU, while obtaining his bachelor's and master's degree in psychology. He earned a dual PhD in economics and Black studies from Michigan State, and is here today as this year's keynote speaker. I'd like to have everybody help me in welcoming Dr. Ken Harris to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. I'm glad there was no bios read today and that we were able to get a few sentences in. So thank you so much, Tracina Cash. I really appreciate you. And today is such a magnanimous day in the fact that we get a chance to learn about what we say in terms of Ghanaian African symbolism, Sankofa, which is to go back in order to realize what we need to go forward. So I bid you all a wonderful welcome in that perspective. And so today, very explicitly, I have a presentation coming from Detroit, Michigan. I can tell the weather is changing here too in Pittsburgh, but it's been an unbelievably warm welcome. And I just want to thank personally everyone who, especially the folks I had the opportunity to meet prior to this meeting as well. So if we can put up the slide presentation, I really want to stay in theme of share. Oh, perfect. Technology. All right. Forward and backward, correct? All right. Thank you so much. You hired a great vendor. That's what this is all about. All right. And so when we think about the message, which I think is perfect for today's time, is our ability to communicate, to collaborate, and mostly have a conversation on commerce-driven activity. And that is the time coming post-COVID, which is going to be essential as we think about what the future of not only America, but our global society and what it looks like. Let's see here. All right, we got it. Okay, so one, I don't want to bore you about me. I played point guard at Clark Atlanta University. I could bounce a ball okay out of Detroit. What's so funny is when I received my scholarship there, the coach was like, "You're doing more outside of basketball than what we brought you here to do." But we were actually really successful. One of the best experiences I ever had in my life was attending a historically black college and university in Clark Atlanta University, where I matriculated. I also served as student government president there, and was also able to be there during a time where Atlanta, if you remember in 1996 and 7, we hosted the United States Olympics. So not only was I the student government president there, I was also the liaison between Mayor Bill Campbell's office and the economic activity that was happening in Atlanta, Georgia at that time. And if you all remember, Atlanta probably was a small little dirt town with police who had walkie-talkies on campus. Then after the Olympics, it's now this worldwide international entertainment capital of the world. And I think it was really sparked by not only the Olympics, but the promise that was made that at least 60% of the billion-dollar contracts in Atlanta would be spent with minorities and black-owned businesses. And that was the first time that I ever heard a local leader explicitly state to the corporate community the impact of using a major event was going to have on that local city. So here I am today because of it, in retrospect. And so I also served as executive vice president for the Michigan Minority Supplier Development Council under Louis Green, in which we have a national MOU through the MBL, in which we are executing today, working closely with Ying McGuire and her team. And for those who will be in New Orleans, I bid you a welcome. We'll have a reception on October the 31st, so I look forward to seeing you there. And just a little bit about the MBL. So yes, we are the first and largest trade association for black businesses. I know there are black chambers that exist in local environments, but similar to our organization, we actually control our local infrastructure and we're not affiliate driven. So we're similar to the NAACP, the Urban League, et cetera, in which we were founded before those organizations. And Booker T. Washington, who it really was before his time, really laid the foundation for this organization in the future. His message today is more relevant than ever before. And so with that, before I get started into the presentation, I just want to personally thank the extraordinary leadership of George Robinson II. Please give him a round of applause and his wonderful team. of whom him and I went to dinner last night. I got a chance to see Pittsburgh in its rawest form after a victory. It was a beautiful thing to see. I can almost predict what's going to happen with the Lions, so we won't go there. Discussing all of the innovativeness that's going on here locally and supplier diversity, and even the economic fabric of the city of Pittsburgh. And so thank you to the county exec and the mayor for having an expressed open dialogue for business to be open to all. I think that is a great start in the conversation towards moving the needle. And I have to say as well, I'm actually quite impressed with the type of leadership at the table. The hospitality has been unbelievable. I just found out the gentleman that's hosting you all here in this wonderful facility is my fraternity brother. I won't mention that fraternity, but we all know which one is the best. I'll leave it at that. And the team assisting, George, Sean Hicks, Mark Lewis. I'm not certain if you all have made it. Damian Wilson, and Ebony, who gave me a warm pickup and drive. And all those behind the scenes and in front, thank you to what you do, all the lives that you help and create opportunities for, especially disadvantaged and disconnected business owners. I want to thank the SharePoint board, the Share board. Are you all here as well? Please give yourselves a round of applause, along with the Poise Foundation and the entire UPMC community and the companies that's participating, because that's what this is all about. It's about innovation. It's about bringing together Western Pennsylvania's regional top corporations and institutions and MBE and women in disadvantaged communities so that we could talk about how to drive commerce and create opportunities. That's what this is all about. And so we must do this work. And so it takes visionary leadership. It takes implementation and execution leadership to get the job done. With that, you know, that gentleman sitting there, his message is more relevant today than it was 122 years ago when he founded the organization that I'm now 16th national president of. And I say he had it right. Why? Because you think of someone who was born into slavery in Virginia in 1856. You think about someone who 9 years later moved to West Virginia with his wife and his family and started to engage the educational process and the training of an entrepreneurial mindset, which was lacking at that time with most black students and most educational curriculums. Even if you see that today, there's a lack of entrepreneurial and enterprise training at the grade school, high school, and even in some cases collegiate level. In Washington, who was self-taught to a certain degree, but encouraged by his mother to achieve greatness and excellence. Someone who eventually went on to found a school. And that school, if you've ever been to Tuskegee University, is the home of the National Business League and also one of the first historically black colleges and universities in this land, in this country, led by his entrepreneurial mindset and innovativeness. Most people don't know that Washington, who is also educated at an HBCU, went to Hampton University. Any Hampton grads in here? Uh-oh, all right. Y'all battle with Howard to say the real HU. Is that right? Okay. HBCU love over there. And so with that, you think about someone who worked his way through salt furnaces and coal mines to pay his way and earn money to go to Hampton University, in which he did. It was Hampton Institute at the time, and that was the foundation that later led him to the extraordinary life and career that he would have to become Tuskegee University's first founding member, and that institution being a symbol today of his entrepreneurial genius. And Booker T left an indelible mark on black history. In 1900, when he founded the National Negro Business League, now known as the National Business League, his primary focus at that time was to create an entrepreneurial mindset amongst black people post-slavery. And if you think about a transient community where you had millions of black people coming off plantations, he felt as though that the #1 pursuit should be enterprise development in a number of different ways. So you think about someone who coined the term Negro Wall Street. Most people don't know that Booker T. Washington came up with that name at an event that he was honored at in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is now known as Black Wall Street today, in which we are celebrating a more than 100-year history of the Tulsa, Oklahoma riots that took place, in which that community was destroyed because of its economic progress and economic innovativeness that today would be a multi-billion-dollar community if it was still in place. And so I like to bring that forward and recognizing our history and where we come from, and that some folks who think they are geniuses, they was thinking this stuff a long time ago. And another conversation when George brings me back, we'll even trace Booker T's philosophy back to ancient Kemet, which is now called Egypt, named after the Greeks, in which entrepreneurial landscapes and economics actually come from indigenous African history that transformed the entire world. And so with that, I just want to take you back because there is a reason why in 2022 we're having this discussion on economic equity and inclusion. And it goes back to the narrative, and we're going to make false narrative false, and we're going to bring truths to light, is that if you haven't purchased the book, The Invention of the White Race, you need to purchase that book, which was created by someone who passed away a few years ago, an intellectual of his kind, Dr. Theodore Allen. So for those of you on your phones who have the ability to Google, you can go to your Amazon or Prime account and order that book. But it was a groundbreaking analysis of the birth of racism in America. And when the first Africans arrived in Virginia in 1619, there were no white people, nor, according to colonial records, there would not be any connotation towards any form of pigmentation for the next 60 years. Why is that? Because in his seminal 2-volume book, The Creation of the White Race was purposeful. It was created by a ruling class as a socio-economic control response to labor unrest during the Bacon's Rebellion. So how many people, raise your hand if you heard of the Bacon's Rebellion? All right, well, we have in history class. I'm both an economist and a historian, and so we love to bring economics into perspective. And so with that, not only during the Bacon's Rebellion, which you will learn about in a second, but this distinguished between European Americans from African Americans within the labor class. And white privileges enforce the myth of the white race through years and centrality of the ruling class's domination over the entire working force. And so, for those who don't know about the Bacon's Rebellion, Nathaniel Bacon was a wealthy white property owner and relative of the Virginia governor, William Berkeley, but Bacon and Berkeley did not like each other. They disagreed over issues pertaining to how the colony should be governed, and including colonies' governing policy of Native Americans and indigenous black people. And in defiance of the governor, Nathaniel Bacon organized his own militia consisting of white and black indentured servants and enslaved black people who joined in an exchange for freedom to attack the nearby tribes, and also began a power struggle that ensued between Bacon and his militia on one side and Virginia's House of Burgesses on the other. And so the rest of the colony's elite on the other side, and conflict went on, including armed skirmishes between the two. And on September 1676, Bacon's militia captured Jamestown, burned it to the ground, and what did they do? They overthrew the white ruling class elite. And during Bacon's rebellion, in a significant scare in response to the ruling class's elites' control over the economic disposition of all of its inhabitants, started to create laws. And this is where race comes into play. So it never existed at one point. You had enslaved white people here, you had indentured servant white people, you had enslaved Native Americans, enslaved indigenous black people, you had free black people and indentured servant black people. So why was this created? So history is so important because when you think about socioeconomic control, as I mentioned in our previous meeting earlier today, it is a failed economic policy. So regardless of what you think about race, it does not work. It's dying on a short vine, and racism cannot take us into the future, which is much more diverse than we could ever think of in this global context. And so I wanted you to see this, this man who had some significant points of view coming off the plantation. And one of his views to black people were, stop worrying about your social status. Stop worrying about political operatives not delivering for you. And stop worrying about your material status and focus on building an economic base as the central mode behind all endeavors in your life. Not only did he believe that, he also believed that enterprise ownership would be the key to freedom and liberation. And we're now coming back as far as business owners to realize that even if I own a business, I can be in a career and still be entrepreneurial minded. I can still have a mindset to create multiple streams of revenue because one job is just not enough in today's time. And so Booker T. Washington had this philosophy over 100-something years ago, a phenomenal man. So be the best in your chosen endeavor and captains of industry. He created the National Business League for professionals to not only master but innovate their chosen professions, but also people who are business owners to be the captains of your industry, to go out not just locally, but regionally, nationally, and globally in context. And if you know Booker T. Washington, he was the predecessor to the Pan-African Congress forming in 1900. He actually funded the first meeting. So last but not least, in his statement, as you can see his strong authority, his intellectualism, and his ability to not only speak to the white masses, but also the black masses in this country, he said, use your head, use your heart, but most importantly, use your hands. And with that more importantness of your head, your heart, and your hands, to cast down your buckets where you are, which is a famous quote of his Atlanta exposition speech in 1895. And what that means is wherever you reside, wherever you lay your head, wherever you work, live, and play, cast your enterprise and entrepreneurial skills where you are. And so this is where we are today. So we have a lot to owe to this individual, which I think is so important. And so we think about Booker T where we were, okay? Now, how did we get here? And you know, as an economist, we're gonna paint that picture because there's a theoretical model that I'm putting you through because I want you to be able to not only research further, I want you to also be able to deliberately accept truths in history and fact as we build for the future. So we think about, why are black folks where they are today? And so if you look at the circumstances, black people who fought for the civil liberties that all ethnic groups and cultures and races in America benefit from today, but without credit, without economic equalization, and most importantly, without recognition, black people are at the bottom of the economic scale. No matter what we have done to push America towards the diversity that is needed for us to survive in the future. And so we were promised 40 acres and a mule after slavery, in which, if some of you all do not know about 40 acres and a mule, it was given to us in 1865 by General William T. Sherman, who met with 20 African-American leaders post-slavery, and he said, what is the best way that we can secure your freedom for the future? And they said it is through enterprise ownership in land. Isn't that interesting? So on January the 16th, Sherman issued Special Field Order number 15. The order reserved coastal land in Georgia and South Carolina for black settlement, and each family was to receive 40 acres. Later, Sherman agreed to loan the settlers not only the acres, but settlers' army mules along with it. 6 months after that, he issued another order, and 40,000 former slaves lived on 400,000 acres of coastal land. And in March, Congress seemed to indicate plans for widespread reform post-slavery. And so we talk about reparations. There's this whole conversation on reparations. And, well, reparations were given post-slavery, and it was enacted by federal policy, if you know your history. And it wasn't a conversation of how we were going to do it. They were doing it. But again, this creation of race that I just mentioned came around, what, 1865, right? 60 years later, like I explained before, policy, like I explained before, to separate black people and indigenous people from white people and also working class white people, okay? And so with that, less than a year after the order, President Andrew Johnson intervened and ordered the most of the land was confiscated and the land to be returned back to their former owners. And guess who got reparations? The white people, the white landowners, received millions of dollars in subsidies for returning land back to their ownership. Isn't that interesting? Then the federal government took back most of the freedmen's land where they settled. They kicked them off the land, and the federal government disposed tens of thousands of black landowners. And in Georgia and South Carolina, some blacks fought back. Some were even killed, lynched, and brought away to major concentration camps. And federal troops also continued to evict blacks wherever they saw them by force. At the end, 2,000 blacks tried to retain their land, and they even worked after the war. So I wanted to paint a picture with that, folks, is that we are where we are because of the systems, institutions, and policy structures that were put in place for a small group of people to maintain their socioeconomic control over black and indigenous people in this country. And that is so important. Then, I always say, they gave us the 40 acres and the mule kicked us into you-know-what, right? All right, so another thing I want to say is, when I say who had it right, you all say Booker T had it right. Who had it right? That's right. Who had it right? That's right. Booker T had it right. He also knew about black codes. And for those who don't know about black codes, sometimes called black laws, this is where laws governing were to conduct over African-American people. The best known laws were between 1865 and 1866 after the American Civil War, which restricted black people and black indigenous people from freedom and compelling them to work for low wages, and that they could not participate in the economic mainstream of society. Isn't that interesting? So there were actually federal and local state laws put on the books to restrict black people from participating in the economic mainstream of society. Talk about control, okay? This all goes back. These laws restricted their freedom, forced cheap labor. It went on to make sure that 4 million slaves were relegated to indentured servitude or even low labor jobs or free labor at best. So even though slavery was over, it just evolved, if that makes any sense. And those folks who fought it, who resisted, because we all know, even though it's not published in the history books, the reason why slavery ended because there were rebellions on slave plantations all across the country and even internationally. So at this point, blacks wasn't having it, right? And so slavery had to end because if you got riots everywhere, if you got buildings burning, what does that hurt? It hurts the economic footprint that was being driven through this country through policy. So there's a method to this madness. And so we have black codes that were put in place. We also went into Jim Crow laws. And if you all know about Jim Crow segregation, they were laws that began as early as what? 1865, folks. Are you seeing the connection here? Right? In 1865, it was following the ratification of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery here in this country. Jim Crow segregation was put in place to make sure that separate, not equal, was in place. And then there was also the formation of the KKK. And most people believe that not only was the KKK, commonly called the Ku Klux Klan, an American white supremacist organization who primarily target black people, but the scenario behind this, they didn't just target black people. What did they target? Any wise answers in the crowd? There you go, George, louder. Poor whites. No, not just poor whites. They targeted black business owners. So any form of enterprise ownership, if you go back and you look at Rosewood and you look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, all of these places where you had black business districts, these places were harassed, oppressed, and even burnt to the ground, and their businessmen and women either lynched or killed. Why? Because it was not for black people to enter the economic mainstream of society by any means necessary. And so for those of you, I'm educating, as I should, you understand several policies that restricted black people from participating in the economic mainstream of society. It's not an emotional discussion. It's fact. It's history. These are the things that we have to deal with. And most importantly, for those, everyone raise your hand if you know what the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are. Raise your hand. This is the education system of the United States of America. Please tell us. All right, not many people know. So Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlawing slavery before the Civil War ended. One of the wars, once it was over, passed these laws, again, I just mentioned as black codes, to keep freedmen from exercising economic development. Congress responded by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1866. Did you all know that there was a Civil Rights Act in 1866? Interesting. Okay, almost 100 years later, they come up with what? A Civil Rights Act again. Okay, all right, you see the history here. You got to know your history. To ensure black citizenship, Congress overrode President Andrew Johnson's veto and went further in passing the 14th Amendment, which was to enfranchise black people to begin exercising political power. And white Southerners and organizations like the KKK targeted to make sure that the 14th Amendment never took place. Interesting, especially after 1867. To protect black voting rights, Congress what? Created the 15th Amendment. Okay, I look at some folks taking notes. I like this. Good. And some folks Googling. Good. This is what's supposed to happen. So the 15th Amendment was actually to protect black people going to the polls from being lynched, murdered, or held away, exercising their political right to have what? Political rights are to have economic rights. That's why politicians are in place, to keep the economy flowing, right? If you don't think that's the case, you better ask your mayor and your county exec. All right. And if it's not happening, somebody's getting fired. And so with that, the 15th Amendment did not allow the literacy test poll taxes, and other things that prevented poor blacks and whites from voting. Matter of fact, the amendments that took place required 3/4 of states to approve them, and 31 states out of 37 had ratified the 14th and 15th Amendment. So, am I painting a very clear picture here, folks, that we are where we are because of systems, institutions, structures, and policies. And if you don't know your history, you can't fight towards removing all forms that limit total freedom and liberation and our ability to make enterprise development at the core of our philosophical and economic thought. And so with that, you all saw the Black Power movement. I'm black and I'm proud. Black folks had enough. They're tired of having their business communities segregated, burnt down, that we couldn't form enterprise, that black wasn't accepted anywhere. We wanted to be ourselves. We started learning about our indigenous roots, going back to the creation of civilization in Africa. We started realizing our true power. We wanted to wear our natural hair, or no hair at all in my case, and to be totally free like everyone else, right? That there's total equality, and that is the case. And so again, in the 1960s and 70s, black people hit the streets, and it was by no means necessary to challenge the system, to challenge corporate America. And the reason why this is so important is because you're going to see this history repeat itself, because until we get to total freedom and liberation, you will always have those who are going to fight for the struggle, especially the next generation. And the wonderful thing, which I love so much about this next generation, is that it's color united. So there are whites, blacks, browns, Asians, everyone coming behind the black agenda, if that makes any sense. People are saying what we've done is wrong. We have to acknowledge the past. We can't erase it. And in order to move forward, we have to acknowledge it, deal with it, and move forward together. And there's no other way, okay? So that's reciprocity. So the Black Power movement, you heard of a lot of names. Folks, the Stokely Carmichaels, the Elaine Browns, the Angela Davises, the Fred Hamptons, the Shirley Chisholms, the international movements that took place that freed South Africa, Ghana, and a lot of our Jamaica, a lot of folks, the movement spread across the world. And here we are again in 2022. And Civil Rights Act was also created in 1964. Just think about that. 100-some years later, you had a Civil Rights Act. It didn't do nothing. It was fluff. It was stopped. Then you had the Civil Rights Act again, 100 years later. It's mostly economic fluff, okay? Or there's inclusion with no economic agenda attached to it. So what is social life without economics? What is educational life without economics? What is political position without economics? It's nothing, all right? So we're getting down to the foundations of this. And again, structural racism. Racism didn't die. It never died. It just evolved. And it evolved behind systems, institutions, and structures. And for those who do not know about those systems, institutions, and structures, is that racism is broadly referred to systems of structures that produce policies and procedures and processes that disadvantage opportunities for blacks and indigenous people and people of color. That's it, period. It's in the structure. I can go into any room, in any organization, in meeting, I can look at the organization, and I can tell you what it is based on sight. Then when I dig in your books, I definitely know what's going on. So guess what? The young people in my classrooms, they're looking not at just the car, they're actually going up under the hood now. And so truth is coming out. It's nothing you can do about it. Either you catch up with it or you'll be ran over by it. That's just what's going to happen. So systematic racism cannot survive. Structural racism cannot survive. It is a failed economic policy that does not produce for the masses, and everyone's, quite frankly, is just tired of it. They're tired of the few just benefiting off of everybody else. And I just hate to say it, even the poor white people that, you know, were given these suspect privileges are starting to find out they were being played to, okay? So we're all kind of coming in this together to make sure that we create the type of democracy in America that we want to see, that's real inclusive, real freedom-oriented, and provides opportunities for everyone, especially when the amount of taxes that we're spending. And so we look at 50-plus years later, post-civil rights, and you see that regardless of civil rights, black people are still at the economic totem pole and ladder of society. Why is that? So now we got to go through another 100 years to realize that the Civil Rights Act did not work? Huh? This is not an emotional discussion. You just follow the data. Was it just another benign neglect policy put in place because President Nixon, who actually wanted to help black businesses start, was it something to give a fraction of the action, is what President Nixon said? Well, I think people want more than just a piece of the pie. People want the whole pie today, right? And so when you think about those philosophies, and I love to describe what benign neglect mean. It was actually a coined term by Senator Daniel Moynihan out of New York in 1970 with a memo to President Nixon while he served as an urban counselor, which was to create a situation of a terminology that said the issue of waste could not benefit from a position standpoint, so we have to create benign neglect. And benign neglect is basically a laissez-faire or do-nothing approach to racial problems. And that's what you see. You see a lot of fluff today. You see a lot of pretty literature. You see a lot of celebrities on commercials. You see a lot of one or two businesses propped up in the media. But when you look at the community as a whole, folks is struggling. Folks don't have access. Folks are saying that even the diversity programs, they can't get nothing done, right? So we got to look at this thing almost like a scientist. And the game is up. The fluff game is up. We got to deal with it because I hate to tell you that the times are changing and so are the populations, so are the consumers. So we are here to help you do that. Next slide. So we think about COVID-19 as I start to wrap up my last two slides. The disproportionate impact on black-owned businesses across this country. It was produced by a study out of California that 40% of black businesses either had closed their doors permanently or were one or two paychecks away. Why? Because they were found out again that traditional banking institutions were not connected to the local communities. And I even say this across the board, not just black and minority-owned businesses, small businesses, period. White-owned businesses that are small felt what it was like not to access capital, not to be able to get a loan, not to be qualified, not to have ecosystems that support them. And so really for small businesses, not just black and minority, we have a serious problem where politicians and our leadership really need to start looking at how do we support small businesses, not just the large businesses, the trickle-down effect, the fraction of the action mentality, but how do we give support to local neighborhood and small business owners? And so where you have an opportunity to do that, we have to do it under leaders like George who are creating models that we are able to get these measurable items done. And then on top of that, you know, folks are just sick and tired of police brutality. It's unacceptable to have unarmed murders of black men and women or anyone in general. People may not like the term Black Lives Matter. It's not really about the term. It's really about why are we in 2022 having to have this discussion? That's really what it's all about. And the economic case that's behind it. And so people rioted and went to the streets and voiced their opinion all across the world. White, black, Hispanic, Asian, everyone saying enough is enough. And that our children's children should not have to deal with this issue. And so here we are today looking at and witnessing this disproportionate impact. We're witnessing what was created. So it wasn't the people in the back room that created these opportunities. It was young people who shook the contours of corporate America to create the narrative of Black racial equity, BIPOC racial equity, and all of these reforms that corporate America announced during these last 3-year period. So when you see a young person, say thank you. Say thank you to the young people. It wasn't none of y'all old heads or in-between heads, right? In your leadership, they shook the walls and said, this is the future that we want, okay? So thank young people. Don't look down on it, because the reason why we are all here collectively together having this discussion is because of young people. And so I just wanted to make that known, because an estimated $50 billion in announcements came from them going to the streets saying enough is enough. And that's what it's going to take. And now you have this unapologetic atmosphere where black and brown and gender-oriented and sexual orientation are coming in the room unapologetic now. They're looking at everything that's in front of them, and they are speaking with no fear. So this is where we got to go into the future. Next slide. As we begin to wrap up, and I just love Booker T. Guess who he's standing next to? Raise your hand. Madam C.J. Walker. So for all you black women in here, Booker T. and Madam C.J. Walker, who was the keynote speaker at several of his conventions in the early 1900s, the first self-made black woman millionaire or woman millionaire in this country. And you see them two together. But the note that I wanted to paint is that COVID-19 was a wake-up call. Why? Because there's a serious digital divide that exists in urban communities. So if you're leaders at corporate America, if you're leaders in terms of your political disposition, focus on the digital divide, because this is going to be the area where we need to make sure that enterprise development takes place. Also, we are launching what we call the Black Economic Freedom Movement Digitize 1 Million campaign, in which we're going to help take those business owners who may not be connected to the digital processes and resources and to move them into the digital age, regardless of what anybody else does. We always will say the revolution won't be televised, but it will be digitized. How about that? And then we went to announce in Washington, D.C. just 2 weeks ago, the National Alliance for Black Business to hold accountable the Fortune 500 companies towards their billion-dollar commitment. The National Business League and the National Black Chamber of Commerce have come together to form this National Alliance for Black Business called NAB, and it's a nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent federation of black business organizations and allies, and will function on the authority to represent, research, educate, promote, and advocate for black business equity in the United States and throughout the Pan-African diaspora. And so if you realize this, we are now coming together, because this is not an emotional conversation anymore. It's a data-driven conversation. So you don't have to like me. I can be sitting in front of a KKK member, and my survey instrument will tell the story. We just want to see the data. We want to see the numbers, and we're going to make it public. There are major partners like Bloomberg and Gwinnett and Black Enterprise and everyone who's interested that we are moving diversity forward, if that makes any sense. And so it's time to make numbers public. It's time to come together as a united front, because we want our grandchildren to see the type of country that they can all be proud of. And that's where we're going, straight, no chaser. And in 2042, the majority of this country will be black and brown. Your majority consumer will be black and brown. We will look like the globe, which is a majority melanated population and demographic. So everything is kind of returning back to nature and turning back to itself. So why don't we all just come together and do the right thing together? That's what this is really all about. So it's not emotional. You don't have to like my personality, but you can provide opportunities to my community. And there's probably a return on investment, an ROI behind that inclusive mentality, that investment-oriented mentality. And so, thank you, Booker T. Washington. This is the solution revolution. No one is interested in problems anymore. We don't sit in meetings where you discuss problems. What are the solutions? How do we measure your solutions? So when I come to an organization as an independent group who wants to see diversity, I'm asking, do you have a diversity and inclusion task force? What does that task force look like? Are minority people a part of that organization? Are they running that organization? Do they have the power to make influence and policy change? And what is the support? Then, as an economist, what are the data-driven results? So it used to be he who holds the gold rules. Today it's he who holds the data and content rules. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. So we are now asking all major corporations that you have your own internal scorecards. That's the only way that we're going to move the needle. It's not an argument. You don't have to like me. We don't have to go to lunch together, but we can move this agenda forward based on measurable items that will benefit us all. That's just the way it is. That was Booker T's philosophy. And also, when I come to organizations, when I meet with the Fortune 500 CEOs, the first thing I'm saying is, what does your board look like? Do you have blacks and minorities on your boards? What does your executive leadership team look like? Do you have blacks and minorities on your executive leadership team? Or are they on there just as a face? Do they have power? Do they have a budget allocated? And what are their reporting mechanisms? Are they meeting with the chairman of the board and the president of the company? It's a new day, folks. We're kind of getting to it, if that makes any sense. And then, what does your supply chain look like? You spend X amount of dollars every single year. What amount of that money is reciprocative of the minority population that you represent? So are contracts being given? Who are those contractors? Or are you choosing one contractor that may have a black face, a brown face, and he gets all the money, she gets all the money, and then you say you have a diverse program? That is not diversity. So supplier diversity is crucial for every major corporation if they want to do the right thing to develop diversity programs. And then marketing and advertising. If you got a black population, if you have black consumers, what does your advertising look like? Does it look like George? Does it look like this sister right here, Meg? Does it look like the people that that you are promoting your product, commodity, good, or service for? So we want advertising to look like our communities, to be intentional about it. Why? There's an economic proposition behind that. And let corporate responsibility be more than just charity. I hate to say it, I'm going to call out some of the black folks in the black organizations. You would do anything for a check and produce nothing. The day and age of chicken dinners, business card exchanges is over with, okay? We have to produce value. We have to have a value proposition, and your value proposition needs to be measurable. I get millions of dollars offered to me all the time, and I say no if it doesn't align with my mission, vision, and purpose. There's a reason behind that, because why? I'm like Booker T. I believe in character and integrity, and I'm not a do-nothing organization. And if you're not trying to do the right thing, we don't want to have no parts of you, because there are a lot of companies trying to do the right thing. Just as I was keynote speaker for General Motors, in their event a few days ago. I'll be speaking at Toyota's event, etc. There are people saying, Dr. Harris, come speak to us. Let us know what we need to do. We are ready 100% to move our companies into the future, period. Anybody in our way, they're done. Okay? And this is what we got to do, right? So corporate responsibility needs to equal dollars. It needs to equal enterprise ownership, et cetera, as I'm wrapping up. And then when we talk about talent placement, It has to be about recruitment, retaining, and reward, creating cultures that may not identify with yours. So yes, you can hire a person, but if they quiet quit, or what they call it today, quiet quitting, if they quit 2 weeks later, then that's not talent retention. What is your company's culture, right? Just because a person doesn't identify with your culture, does that mean they can't be productive? Come on, man, we got to get with the times. And when we talk about culture affinity groups, all of our companies should have affinity groups where people can join their own spaces, safe spaces, and be a part of those spaces and feel proud and be a part of the overall cultural aspect. And then resources, partnership, and giving. When we look at real resources, let's focus on business development. Let's focus on enterprise development. If you have a supply chain, let's focus on creating opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and minority and gender and sexual orientation specific businesses. And when I speak of white LGBTQ, white women, and also white gender-based sexual orientation, I'm also thinking about, do not leave out minority women, minority veterans, and minority LGBTQ, okay? So if I go to a meeting, you say it's diversity, and I go in that meeting and it's lily white, then I truly know that that's not diversity, okay? That's just another sham game. And so with that, I wanted to share some of those points because that's what sharing is all about. Thank you, George, because this is about share. So this man right here said, a lie doesn't become the truth. It doesn't become, wrong doesn't become right, and evil doesn't become good just because it's accepted by the majority. And so, as I wrap up, this thing that we are participating in is a beautiful thing. I'm excited about the future. I get excited coming to opportunities like this because people are now coming together, regardless of race, creed, color, sexual orientation, or gender. We are now saying it's time for a new lifestyle, a new quality of life. And so programs that have real economic inclusion and solutions, institutions and structures that support diversity through policy orientation. Benign neglect is not a part of the process, that we're actually moving the needle. It's okay to say Black. It's okay to say Hispanic. It's okay to say all these things. Why? Because as long as it's part of the census, then it's a real thing in terms of policy since the beginning and foundation of this country. And so when we think about inclusion, Booker T. Washington had it right. He had it right. Booker T. also said that also Black people, you got to become responsible for yourself in many cases. Your businesses should be the #1 employer of Black people, right? So it's so important. We should have an entrepreneurial mindset in everything that we do. Racial equity is economic progress, and support Black businesses whenever, and Indigenous and minority and diverse businesses whenever you have the opportunity. We have to digitize to survive and build a Black economic system. And as a professor, I always leave you with resources as my last slide. When Affirmative Action Was White is a great book that white people received affirmative action post-slavery before anyone else. They were set up with a nest egg and the ability to get land and housing and build the generational wealth gap that you see today. White Rage, the unspoken truth of our racial divide. White Fragility, why it is so hard for white people to talk about race, by Dr. D'Angelo, who's a white woman who lays it out. The Cost of Privilege, taking on the system of white supremacy and privilege. How to be an anti-racist. Caste, Weapons of Whiteness, explaining the master tools behind the mask of anti-blackness. The Color of Money, Black Banks and the Racial Wealth Gap. The New Jim Crow, Color Blindness in the Age of Mass Incarceration. And last but not least, The Color of Law, the unforgotten history of how the government segregated America to make sure that there was socioeconomic control. Thank you, everyone. Are there any questions or answers you may have that I can answer if we have time, or if we don't, I just say to you all, thank you. This is my contact information. We have an unbelievable opportunity in front of us. It starts with programs like you see today, where you're taking corporations, you're matching them with diverse opportunities. Share is the future. This is the model. Everyone needs to get behind it. Put your support behind it, your resources, your money, and also your leadership behind it. So thank you all so much. And George, it's an absolute honor and a privilege to be here before your August body today. Thank you all so much. I'm Dr. Ken Harris. I look forward to working with you all.
Appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that we are a few minutes behind. I know that Fantasy was going to come up. I believe I see her walking up now. She's going to provide the modified schedule since we are running roughly 5 minutes behind. So with that, thank you again, Dr. Harris, for your moving remarks, the information, the knowledge, the history, because those are the foundations that we're building off of to create the diversity that our corporations and our community here in Pittsburgh, number one, deserve, and number two, that you should enjoy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Fantasy for further instructions. Thank you for coming today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see everybody here. First of all, just wanted to thank George and the committee and everybody for having me again this year. I want to say this is my 4th or 5th year that I have planned, and probably my 5th or 6th that I've attended. Originally, many of you heard the story, but I originally was attending as a vendor. So it is super exciting to still be working on the other side and being able to support vendors like myself from many years ago. I'm also super happy we were able to hire Jordan McMillan from Cut and Run today to do our live streaming and our video and photographs. He's also a diverse vendor who has come to share many times. So, you know, they're walking the talk, and we're both very thankful for that. So thank you guys for that. So now I'll talk a little bit about the matchmaking. We are a little bit behind, but I think what we'll just do is just start where we are and go from there. The meetings are 10 minutes long with a 5-minute break. So we will have a countdown. It's not going to be visual, but we will be in the room counting down for you. And when you hear us say, you know, the 3:15 meeting's over, please clear the room, we'll do our 5 minutes. What I'm going to do, I think, is cut those breaks just a little bit for the first couple so that we end up back on time within 1 or 2 of the meetings, just to kind of keep everybody's schedule going. I do have a matchmaking help desk set up in the back near the coffee station, where if you are looking for meetings, you want to have a meeting, kind of talk to me there. We're going to be doing in real time, because what happens is some people set up a meeting, they may not be here, perhaps because we're running late, they have to leave, or whatever the case is. So for the buyers who have meetings scheduled, if one of your meetings doesn't show, please signal to us in the room that you have an opening, because there's many suppliers here today who have already spoke to me that they would like to jump in if possible with some meetings. So any free time that you have, just, you know, raise your hand, look for myself or anybody from my team. Kay right there will be in the room. Look for her, and we'll go on and let the suppliers that are waiting to meet with y'all, let them jump in and, you know, take advantage of this afternoon. What else can I tell you? We have Jordan and his team are going to be asking some folks for interviews. They have a camera, still camera set up in the matchmaking room, and that's to kind of get some testimonials. So if there's anybody who has been to share in the past, who has some great antidotes that they would like to share, please check out Jordan and his team. And if we grab you, please join us for an interview. You know, the testimonials and the people talking about you know, what Share has done is really what continues to make this a success, and spread it, and help us to spread the word about what a great event this is. I think that's it. So without further ado. Oh, okay. So obviously, if you guys are here, you're doing your meetings in person. But for the buyers that are doing their meetings online, I was looking at the schedules, and they're kind of going back and forth. So you'll have You might have an in-person one followed by a virtual one. We did spread the tables out a little bit, however, it will be, probably loud in there. So if you can find a place, we have some tables set up outside here. But for your virtual meetings, you'll just flow right into them the same way. You'll log into the website and you'll just click on the meeting. You'll see the button right there. You'll also, 10 minutes before each meeting, receive an email about that where there'll be a link in that specific meeting that'll take you right to that virtual. And that'll go for any suppliers that are leaving it, participating virtually as well. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? You're welcome to hang out in here. We do have food being served. There's some coffee and tea and whatnot in the backs of beverage stations. So please enjoy yourselves while we're meeting, and make sure to network and meet as many people as you can. So thank you. We'll go ahead and get started now with the 3 p.m. Meetings.